And if you think about a caregiver at home and the number of plants,
He doesn't need many.
he doesn't, it's not that, a hoop house is not gonna be that big of a deal anyway, it's gonna be relatively small.
There's now that it's gotten so popular, there is kind of like a craft offshoot, which is like naturally grown
Like your
outdoors.
deer.
Yeah.
You know, that's a outdoor now, where-
Free range?
Yeah, yeah, for real. It's nuts. So I can take that input if you guys want to take a look, and we can kind of follow up at the next meeting and try to dissect this more once you guys have had a chance to.
It's been a good discussion, it's helpful. The only thing I would say coming out of it is we just get good definitions for the different
Different types of marijuana.
separately.
Yep.
And also, I have one more question. It sounds like they want us to decide if we want to limit how many of these operations are in the town.
Well, I think I don't know if they want us to decide that, I think they're looking for input.
But either way, they're looking at us for that, where I feel it falls on the person who, the licensee. Because you're going to limit the amount of licenses, and that's really not what we're looking at. They decide how many licenses. So I don't think it's the operation. It's because you have you could have a medicinal, you can have recreational, and that's two licenses. So
Yeah.
that would absorb 2 licenses. So they would really need to figure that out. I think our responsibility is to decide where the different facilities would be.
Yeah, I think we have the
I don't know.
environmental concerns and where, I think are what this board should probably focus on.
Yep.
Would a town ordinance have any say in terms of size of business, i.e. number of plants on site or value of product produced per year kind of thing?
I think we could probably limit square footage if that's something you guys are interested in. That would probably be the most realistic way to do that. The plants thing, that would be tough because the growing stages, they might have some in this stage, some in this stage, some in that stage. And I know that's always a topic of discussion because it's based on mature plants, not, seeded plants or whatever. So yeah, I think square footage, if that's a route you guys want to go, could be something we look at. I didn't see any in my exploration of other towns that had anything to do with square footage in marijuana ordinances. There may be something in their land use that restricts it. But
From reading in the newspaper, most of the restrictions, like where they limit the number of stores or facilities, is only with the recreational stores. Because if it's a warehouse and it's storing refrigerators or it's growing marijuana, it really doesn't affect the community all that much.
Yeah.
As long as it addresses what our concerns have been.
But, Alex, I'm more along the lines of Mark and kind of what I started talking about earlier. I know the planning board is looked at as, the originator of 95% of the ordinances of the town, so the expertise has always rested with the board. But the decisions that are being made are not planning board decisions.
that's correct, yeah.
They're selectmen decisions.
Yep.
So I don't think it's, what you're looking for from us, you should be looking for from the selectmen. And let them make those decisions and come back with those decisions, and then we'll get them into a working ordinance that fits with their town.
And I think
and add what we need on the nitrate and all that where we have the expertise. But the licensing overview of what all this is going to look like, that's selectmen stuff.
Yep.
And it really is kind of a waste of our time to go through and figure out all of this licensing stuff just to have them say yes or no.
I agree.
So I know we talked about, probably a bad term, joint meeting, but, we had talked about setting up something, so maybe we want to do an earlier meeting with them to kind of define, to your point, what they really looking for us to do, because like you said, more of this is policy and licensing than it is actual technical matters of.
Yeah, and now you could set up a meeting with the whole board, or we could have 1 or 2 reps at the selectmen meeting to say where our expertise is and what we're involved in.
Yep.
But you guys, decide what you want, and we'll get it into an ordinance.
Would you guys, can we come to a consensus? Do you want to all be involved in that discussion, or do we want to just have Bob and maybe one other person, or how do you guys want to do that? because I could talk to Dawn tomorrow and see if we can get with the select board chair and maybe set something up. And we can have it be full select board, full planning board, or just one of you, two of you in the select board, or
But before that step, I don't want to speak for the whole board. So, I mean, are you guys comfortable with having the selectmen make these decisions and not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that-
Absolutely.
Sounds good
Okay.
to me.
All right, so that next step would be meeting.
okay.
I mean, the fact that you've got a draft, has the Board of Selectmen seen this yet?
No.
So, I mean, that's the other thing, maybe we should share that
Yeah.
with them, let them take a look at it, and then we schedule combined meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that.
Okay. So we got not a lot of time here,
Well, okay, I'll do.
7 minutes.
We do the solar.
Did we get solar done in 7 minutes?
Yeah, we'll do solar.
All right, let's at least get that done.
This is a draft that we used, we presented to Poland as well, and it looks at, it's called solar energy systems, and under purpose, Alex and I this afternoon, we're gonna, Kevin, this is really geared to you because I know how you feel about this, but we're gonna exempt home installations from this ordinance, so they will not be part of this. So if it's for an individual use or consumption, then they're not partake. This is really for energy systems that are going back into the, big system, commercial grade systems that are going back into the grid. And it just looks at all the various sizes and everything. Submission requirements are pretty straightforward. Things that we want to see on the plan. I think the fire department is probably going to want to have a little input maybe into some more technical pieces of this. If you look at page 2, this is new from the DP. There's actually a decommissioning bond, and I think we saw that with the last one. But that's going to be directly in the ordinances now. The other thing that we want to make sure of is that I had to review on in Poland, for instance, and it was close to the airport, so we want to make sure that these don't interfere with any aeronautical pathways or anything like that, because there is some reflectivity that may interfere with those, so that's why that's in there. Getting back to visual impact, there's standard information at that. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we're seeing now from the public. There's concerns about visual impacts, specifically from public ways and public waterways, and making sure we have adequate buffers. If you look at setbacks under E dimensionals, I have 5, but that should be 50. Typically that's the normal setback, but we can set that for anything you feel comfortable with. And then there's just things about impervious surface ratios and things like that. DP has already kind of ruled that they don't count these as impervious surface, but the access roads and all the equipment do fall under that. And then there's a whole bunch of other standards as far as electrical, building, fire code, things like that.
Where is our ordinance on where we can build these?
That would be up to you guys to decide.
Yeah.
And I think we were thinking the same thing. We were
Add
thinking
it
that
to-
probably these are most,
No shoreland.
no shoreland,
Right.
probably industrial, commercial, and the same thing. I think these could be, obviously, we've seen them in the rural. We've got 2 in town
Right.
that are coming forward. Oh, we got 1 in town right now that's in a rural district. But that's why the setback may be a valuable thing. I mean, the standard has been 50, but that doesn't mean if we're in a rural district, we could make them go to a larger buffer. So those are
Yep.
things that we need to have some input on. What's appropriate screening. And I think definitely from a public way or from a public waterway, we want to have decent buffers.
Right.
And then the neighboring sidelines, we can decide that. But I do think that the biggest stigma I've seen is the visual impact from public ways. People driving down a road don't want to see a sea of black. If we had a tree buffer or something between them and I know a lot of these initially were going up, we're supposed to be in old abandoned farm fields, but we're seeing more and more of these now going into pristine woodlots.
Yep.
So there's an opportunity there to screen them at least, so they don't.
I think we should get a section in here for Wayne for his accessibility.
Yeah, oh, it's definitely,
Yeah.
definitely, that would be something we'd want in here. So that's that's that one in a gist. And I think the biggest one there is again, buffers and figuring out what's acceptable. So the rest of it's kind of boilerplate. And the next ordinance we had was boat storage, which was really defining.
Yeah, we don't have a definition for boat storage. So for the next meeting, I can probably bring in a definition for that. But again, we're in the same situation where we would need to also plot that into some zones too, and where that would be allowed.
And the issue we have there is, should it be tiered? Because we know, some people may have their neighbor's boat or their own boats. I mean, as long as the boats are in your registration, we wouldn't restrict that.
Right.
But if suddenly you're taking your neighbor's boats, okay, when does it become a boat storage facility? Or is there a tiered, is there a low level and then a major level, a commercial level, Because we see more and more of that now, where people are taking boats for friends and things and storing them in their backyard. So just trying to prevent it from getting out of control, basically. Because they do add impervious cover, and then the biggest thing is just making sure that they're not doing anything else. It's not a working boat yard where we're not doing repairs, we're not doing, all the chemical things that you do on a fiberglass and things like that. So that's what we're trying to prevent.
We do have some people in town that are not in commercial, industrial, or shoreland zones. They're in rural residential, village residential, that are looking to try and do boat storage at their house. So that's kind of where the red flag for me came from, where we probably should get a definition, some allowed zones, and maybe some standards, so that we have the ability to say, no, that's not allowed in this particular zone, for example. Or else we might end up with them in areas we don't want through conditional use approval through ZBA or something. So.
And the same thing, we don't really have, we could even do a performance standard for those
We
as
might be
well.
able to put a few together, yeah.
But, and you see that more than the board and I do, as far as how many people may have interest in that. But I think we've seen through Naples and up through Bridgeton that there's been if you go on 302, there's been quite an explosion of boat storage facilities. Through this pandemic, boats have become, very popular again.
What is the setback reduction and variance?
So essentially, they're in both the land use ordinance and the shoreline zoning provisions. We allow for a variance and a setback reduction, which is basically a variance with different standards. So one of the things, is David on the Zoom meeting?
Yeah.
I don't know if he wants to say anything or not, but the ZBA would like you guys to look at that, and I can get you more information for the next meeting on specifically what the issue is. It's kind of confusing for the ZBA because the wording and I can pull it up exactly, the wording in one of them almost basically makes it so you can't get the other one. So the ordinance needs to be tweaked in some way, and it's probably going to require some help from the town attorney, because I don't really know what the best solution is, how to fix that, because people do come in for setback reductions, which is easier to get. So that one I can do a little bit more work on between now and the next meeting and give you guys something to actually make a decision on, because right now you can't really make any decision on it. So, and then visual impacts was the one that you had brought up, Bob.
Right.
And that's and as you and I discussed, that's a pretty subjective. We were kind of discussing it. To us, it almost feels like it falls into the guidelines. With the way this one's written, from a standpoint.
That might be a bad way to approach it.
It may not be. This could be attached as part of the guidelines,
right,
and follow it through that procedure, where it's not necessarily a standard, but it's a go-by guideline for us to follow. Say you could put in the ordinance that for visual impacts fall within the recommendations of the guidelines or something to that effect.
Actually, I think it might be a really good way to do it.
Otherwise, as we were talking about, it is one of those subjective things that even when you put a point system on, it's subjective. There's no black and white technical evaluation. It's how do you feel, and you could get 5 or 6 different answers from this board for one thing. But, I mean, it's something I think you should look at, and maybe that's a way we can approach
Yep.
it.
So Sandy, that's a what, if you could get out to everybody.
I will make sure that
Thanks.
it is, yeah.
And then, so, I mean, that kind of, I mean, that may be the way we can just tack that whole, because this comes from the Maine State Planning Office, so we could
Yep.
find a place to put that in that guideline. Accessory residential apartments,
Yeah, that was one that was added from one of you guys. Someone wanted to look at possibly removing,
The second structure,
yeah, not allowing accessory residential
and
apartments.
going back to a single structure.
Yeah. So that's up to you guys. There is basically a performance standard for accessory residential apartments.
And we can, I don't want to hold up the next meeting too much, but that we can just discuss that amongst ourselves in the next meeting.
Yeah.
That'll be a very
right,
simple
right.
change.
I mean,
Not
it's in or out, right?
Right, it's either one way, it's either, right.
Right,
either
it's in or
out.
out. It's nothing that we gotta rewrite, it's just whether it's in or it's out.
Right. Well, you'd have to rewrite it a little bit.
A little
because
bit, right,
You'd have
you'd
to
have
put the
to- yeah.
old one back.
Right.
Okay.
And then the last one, well, we have two actually, I think, was lot size reduction. That was the one you found, Mike, with the cluster. And the revision there would be to remove the language about half acre to take it down to 20,000.
And that's more of an admin.
That's all it is
We'll
really
have
now.
that one.
And the other one we found recently was in the subdivision ordinance, under the street standards. We still have language in there that limits it to 1,000 feet length. But last year we went through and we allowed provisions that you could go longer than 1,000. So the idea is making sure we have correlating language that allows for that additional length as long as you obtain the waiver. So it's really to refer to the street ordinance in that section of the subdivision ordinance rather than have it specific. We just refer to the street ordinance, which allows for the waiver. So it's just a correspondence reference thing to make sure we have it in the subdivision ordinance, because right now it limits it to 1,000 feet. But all along, you have the ability to waive that, but this just now sets up the criteria for what the waiver is, so it's a reference thing.
Okay,
Is there
That's
anything
it.
else?
That's it for now, yeah.
That's it for now.
let's take a couple of minutes break. Kevin, I didn't mean to ignore you on, when we were talking about the marijuana issue. Are you okay with the approach? Yeah, which way we're going?
With what?
Are you, with the marijuana issue, are you okay with the approach?
Oh, yeah, I'm fine with that,
Okay.
yeah, I have anything.
Okay, so let's just,
Although I did have one interesting thing that maybe for the solar or anything that has, a lot of these places, they bring in the containers, you know, the shipping containers, and they're specific, they're not like storage things, they may put some electronics in them, they may put some control systems in them, they may use them for spare storage of some parts. And the way our ordinance reads, they can't do that. Is that something we should be looking at, the usage of containers, storage containers?
So we
shipping
could look
containers?
at maybe a section maybe that deals with equipment, allowed equipment, and we could write up something with that as long as that stores equipment for the use. Is that what you're getting at,
Right.
Kevin? Would that
Because
be, are you looking at
we talked
strictly?
that in the past, where we talked about shipping containers are being used for a lot of different things now than just storage. I mean, they're being built, insulated, and used for housing
But if
and
If
shops.
it's used for, it's one thing if it's used for storage, but if it's used for equipment, does that fall under a building code or a fire code?
I think it would.
Especially for that type of industry?
Yeah. You would have to meet.
Something we can take a look at,
Privacy
Kevin. We'll
yeah.
do a little more research into that one for
Okay.
you. And you're talking about not a fixed structure, you're talking about a temporary structure or a trailer, correct?
Well, I mean, it could be put on, when you fix.
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
You have a foundation, right?
Yeah, it's gets back to the container use for multiple structure purposes.
Right.
I look for you two to give me a little guidance on that one. Okay?
okay, let's we'll end the workshop. And in the back there, do you want to give us like a 2 minutes and then start the planning board?
That sounds good, I'll punch out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would suggest not to take.
Welcome to the welcome to the December 8th, 2021 Planning Board meeting for the Town of Raymond. The board will come to order. The board does have a quorum, and we're now going to hold a roll call. We'll start with you, Mike.
Mike D'Arcangelo?
Greg Foster?
Robert O'Neill.
Ed Kranich?
Mark Childs.
This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specific, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just leave me out.
Left you out again, Kevin. What's that thing?
It might not happen.
And Kevin Woodbury is our last member there. This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, you have the right to hear everything that has been said and to look at all the exhibits that are presented. Please notify the chair if you're unable to see or hear. The board works from a published agenda, and we'll be considering tonight's items in the following order. We have minutes from the November 10th meeting. We have a project that's on the table from R.N. Wiley & Sons, and new business, a Sebago Techniques project on behalf of CF Brandon Chase, or excuse me, Brandon Chase Builders. In each instance, the burden is upon the applicant to demonstrate compliance with the provisions of the applicable ordinances or state law. All persons speaking, including representatives of the applicant and members of the public, are asked to stand at the microphone and state their name, address, and affiliation with the application. All persons speaking shall address the chair. Any conversations must be held in advance until after the board is formally adjourned. After the board votes on the merits of each application, it will prepare a written notice of decision. Because the notice of decision may substantially affect any appeals rights, and also as a matter of courtesy, the board asks that those attending the meeting with regard to a specific application not leave until the board has completed its discussion. Appeals from adverse decisions must be filed with the Superior Court or as otherwise provided by law within 45 days of this board's decision. Also, to be certain that you preserve your individual right to file any such appeal, you must be certain that the board records evidence of your appearance this evening. All right. Minutes from November 10th. Any changes, modifications? Is there a motion?
Motion to approve the minutes?
Second?
Second.
Second?
All those in favor? Kevin?
Aye.
Yep. Done, approved. Unanimous. All right. Next up is our tabled application. So we would need a motion to remove it to the table and bring it back for consideration.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? What we're doing? All those in favor? All right, we're back. Right here. And Jim, do you want to start us off?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is back for a final plan review. This is a subdivision located in the Village Residential District. It's been before the board 2 or 3 times, but I think we're at the point now where we're able to make a decision on this as a final plan. The applicant has come back with an amended revised plan. The changes to the plan included revisions to one of the lots, which was originally 20,000 square feet to include now the half-acre sizing, so there was a revision to that. They've included updates to the open space areas, as well as they've added a note which we requested for basements being at least 1 foot above wetland elevation. We have received a letter of financial capacity from Evergreen Credit Union. I believe they're going to update that with an act. I have requested that they put a value to that letter because it was just a generic letter, and I think they've updated that to include 200,000.
We did that and sent it over to you.
Okay.
Yep, we got
Okay,
that.
you got that, okay. And then we've also draft HOA documents, which we will request be notarized or recorded, prior to occupancy. And they did require Maine DEP approvals, which I believe are copied in your packet as well for the stormwater component. The only thing that I had left, which Justin, is the last meeting we had talked about at the intersection, installing a light or maybe some signs
thought I
with-
saw that somewhere. Did you put in there that you're gonna put a light in?
They asked for the waiver of it's an outstanding waiver for the grades next to the intersection, but we had talked about a light installation and possibly some signs, warning of the intersection, which we're gonna coordinate with the public works. So that can either be a condition, or we can, if you don't have it already yet.
Yeah, whatever required there for the lighting on the pole, we'll get it done.
So other than that, I think they've addressed all the items, and you can go through them. I would recommend you just give Dustin an opportunity to present anything that I may have missed.
Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
Dustin, you're
Yeah.
up.
Thank you. I'll just be brief. There isn't a whole lot of additional information that I think I need to go over. One of the items that would be an action item tonight is the waiver request for the road standard for the slope, which we did put in writing in the cover letter that we had submitted to you on November 12th. So we'd ask for a vote on that waiver tonight for the road slope to be allowed to be 4% for that section that's adjacent to Pipeline Road. And other than that, I believe we've the final plan that we will, if the plan gets voted on and approved tonight, we would provide a plan at a subsequent meeting that would have the conditions of approval listed on it. We can add the street light that Jim mentioned as a note, if that's appropriate. And we would also be having a surveyor's stamp affixed to the plan before we would have the board sign it. So I think those were the last remaining items, and I'll turn it back over to you, and we're here to answer questions.
Thanks, Dustin. Does the waiver get on?
Yes.
It does, okay.
The waiver gets put in both the findings of fact, which we'll present at the next meeting, if you approve it this evening.
Right.
And it also, we request that any waivers that are granted be placed on the recorded plat as well.
Okay, what documentation does the town say, the requested waiver? With our plan?
It's on his cover letter here, so that's all we need.
So we just say the cover letter?
Yeah, it's in the file for the application, so all the materials go into an application file, so we have the request.
Okay.
I mean, and that's why we put it on the plan as well, that once you grant it, he'll put a note on there that you granted the applied waiver.
Yeah, no, the only reason why I asked is, and it's not a big deal, but normally the waivers come as a separate item, not, and I was just wondering how they get saved.
Yeah, typically we get them either in a cover letter
Yeah.
or in the application, so
We never told
all the
Dustin.
materials are saved as part of the application, so.
It's one of the things we didn't tell you, Dustin, but it's gonna have to be done.
What's that? Just
So I'm okay.
in writing?
Yeah.
All right.
You couldn't see his chin
Yeah,
drop
you
behind
did.
the mask. It wouldn't have the same effect, did it, Bob?
That's the problem with these masks. So before we get going on the project, the waiver is an all-stopper, so we should take that first.
And just so I can refresh everybody, the issue is that the grade at that intersection exceeds what we typically allow, but we did walk that through with Nathan and myself and the engineer, and we felt it was appropriate. It did not cause any safety issues or any visual obstructions or anything like that. It actually matches the cross slope that's on that road at that particular location. So the Public Works Director was on board, and I believe you discussed this even at the last hearing,
Right.
but we didn't make a formal vote, and I
Yep.
believe the straw poll was that you would support it. So this evening would be your time to discuss it and make your final vote.
Does anybody need to discuss it? Do you know, everybody remember?
Yep.
Good, okay. All right, so I just move that that the planning board accepts the waiver of the road construction standard for, what are we calling it? Is this the Boulder?
Yes.
Boulder Bend?
Well, that's another item that we're gonna have to discuss. I guess it would be the Patricia Avenue and Pipeline
Yeah.
Road subdivision at this point.
We'll keep calling it Boulder Bend subdivision, but we're going to give the road a new name.
Okay, there you go.
All right.
Will that be updated on the plan?
It
Yes.
will be, yeah.
Is there a second?
So I'll second it.
Any discussion on what we're doing? All those in favor? Kevin?
Aye.
All right, okay, so the waiver's granted. All right, so now we can move forward.
And as I said, you can go through each one of these criteria, or you can lump them all together. Like I said, the only condition I would have is that we want to coordinate with the Public Works Director for the applicant's responsibility for any lights or entrance signage that may be needed, because that is on a corner. We discussed at the last meeting the idea of putting a light at
Right.
the intersection.
Yep.
And any appropriate signs would be left up to the Public Works Director. So that would be my only condition of recommendation. You have everything.
Wayne, you also had a couple other things that
Mhm.
Well, Wayne's memo would be part of that as well.
the gate and Knox box.
I think those are on the plan, the Knox box and the,
Yeah, and at some point, what we'll do is we'll send the plan to Wayne and Jim and Alex, and you guys can look at it and just make sure that it's got everything on it that you need before it goes to the board for signatures. So we'll have one last look at
and
it.
under that section, I think what we'll do is just refer to as a condition that must comply with the fire department's memo dated.
December 2nd.
Yeah. Exactly. So there's two conditions,
What was the first condition?
the street light and the signage. Sorry, Wayne.
All right, so we,
I know.
is there any
usually give me the
discussion,
elbow.
anybody got comments on this one? We've been through this a number of times.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is you're waiting on the